Hey plant lovers, welcome back. I want to tell you about the strangest thing I ever watched happen on a windowsill. A single jade leaf, one that had snapped off when I bumped the pot, moving it into better light, sat forgotten on the soil for almost 3 weeks. I assumed it was dead. It had gone slightly soft, a little wrinkled at the cut end. And then, one morning, I looked closer and saw a thread of pale pink root reaching down into the dirt, and the tiniest cluster of new leaves pushing out of the spot where it had once joined the stem. I had done nothing. I hadn't planted it. I hadn't watered it. That leaf decided, entirely on its own, to become a whole new plant. That moment changed how I thought about jade plants forever. Because here's what most people don't realize. When you propagate a jade from a single leaf, you are not really making the plant do anything. You are simply getting out of its way and letting it do something it has been engineered by millions of years of evolution to do all by itself. So today I'm going to walk you through exactly how to turn one jade leaf into a brand new plant. I'll show you the two methods, the one I've used for years and the one I tested side by side against it. And I'll explain the biology underneath every single step so you understand not just what to do, but why it works. By the end, you'll be able to look at any healthy jade on your shelf and see a dozen future plants hiding inside it. Let's start with what you actually need, because this is one of those rare cases where less really is more. You need a healthy jade plant to take a leaf from. You need a pair of clean, sharp pruning shears, though as you'll see in a moment, you may not even need those. You need a small pot with a drainage hole. And you need a gritty, fast-draining soil. I use a cactus and succulent mix, the kind you can grab at any Home Depot or Lowe's for a few dollars, and that's really all it takes. No rooting hormone, no heat mat, no special equipment. A jade leaf comes preloaded with everything it needs. Now, the very first thing I want you to understand is how to take the leaf, because this is where the majority of failed propagations actually fail, and almost nobody talks about it. You have two options. You can snip the leaf off with your shears, cutting as close to the stem as you possibly can. Or, and this is the method I actually prefer, you can gently wiggle the leaf side to side with your fingers until it pops cleanly off the stem. Here's why that matters so much. For a jade leaf to root, you need the complete leaf. The entire thing, including the little base where it attaches to the stem. If you cut and leave a sliver of leaf behind on the stem, or worse, if you tear the leaf and the base stays attached to the plant, that leaf will never root. It will just sit there, shrivel, and rot. A partial leaf cannot regenerate. It needs the whole structure intact. Think about that for a second. The power to grow an entire new plant is concentrated right at that base, at the exact point where the leaf met the stem. That's not an accident. And we'll come back to why in just a moment, because the reason is genuinely one of the most remarkable things in all of botany. So you've got your clean whole leaf. Now comes the step everyone wants to skip, and skipping it is the second great killer of jade propagations. You wait. You take that leaf and you set it somewhere dry, out of direct sun, and you leave it alone for 3 to 5 days. You do not plant it, you do not water it, you do not touch it. What you're waiting for is something called callusing. The wet, exposed wound at the cut end needs to dry out and form a dry, sealed layer of tissue, a scab, essentially. If you plant a fresh, moist cut directly into damp soil, that open wound is an open door for rot and fungus, and your leaf will turn to mush before it ever has a chance. The callus is the leaf's natural bandage. Give it those few days to form, and you've eliminated the single most common cause of failure. If you're finding this useful so far, do me a favor and subscribe, because I put out a new plant video every single week, and I'd hate for you to miss the branch cutting method, which is a whole different and equally rewarding process I'll be covering soon. Okay, your leaf has calloused. Now I'll show you the two ways to actually root it, and I genuinely tested these against each other to see which one wins. The first method is the one I've used for years, and it could not be simpler. You just lay the leaf flat on top of the soil. That's it. You don't bury it, you don't push it in, you lay it on the surface, cut end touching the dirt, and you walk away. Over the coming weeks, fine roots will emerge from that calloused base and reach down into the soil all on their own, and a tiny rosette of new leaves will begin forming right at the same spot. Every few days, I'll lightly mist the soil around it, just enough to keep the surface from going bone dry, but I never soak it. And here's the part that fascinates people the most. That leaf doesn't actually need you to water it to survive. It's running on its own internal reserves the entire time. The second method I'd seen in other people's gardens and in posts online, but had never actually tried myself, so I decided to run it as a real side-by-side experiment. Instead of laying the leaf flat, you stand it more upright, pressing the cut end down into the soil at a slight angle, so the body of the leaf points up toward the light. The principle is identical, roots forming from the calloused base, but the leaf's orientation is vertical rather than horizontal. I took 2 leaves from the same plant on the same day, calloused them together for the same number of days, and set them in identical pots of the same soil, side by side on the same east-facing windowsill, so the only real difference between them was orientation. Then I did the hard part, which was waiting and watching without meddling. Here's what I found. The flat-lying leaf showed visible activity sooner. Roots reached the soil first, and the first hint of a new rosette appeared a touch earlier. Almost certainly because more of the leaf surface was in direct contact with the moist soil and catching light, giving it more points from which to start. If your only goal is to see something happen fast, flat wins. But then it got interesting in a way I didn't expect. The upright leaf, once it finally got moving, seemed to channel its energy more cleanly into a single, well-formed new plantlet, while the flat leaf put out a couple of smaller starts that competed with each other a little. The upright method also kept the leaf itself a bit drier and less likely to sit in damp contact and rot. So neither one is wrong, and neither is clearly better across the board. Flat is faster and more forgiving for beginners. Upright can be tidier and a touch safer against rot. My honest advice? If you've got leaves to spare, and with a healthy jade you always do both. Run your own little experiment on your own windowsill and let the plant show you what it prefers in your conditions. That's half the fun of this anyway. Now let me pause, because you deserve to understand what is actually happening inside that leaf while it sits there looking like it's doing nothing. This is the part nobody talks about, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a jade the same way. A jade plant, Crassula ovata, is native to a very specific and very harsh part of the world. It comes from the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal provinces of South Africa, growing wild on dry, rocky hillsides and exposed slopes where rain is unpredictable and drought is simply a fact of life. Picture that landscape for a moment. Thin, gritty soil clinging to rock, months that can pass with almost no rain at all, brutal sun overhead, goats, antelope, and other browsing animals moving through, nibbling at anything green and fleshy enough to be worth the bite. This is not a gentle place to be a plant. It is a place that punishes any plant that gambles its energy on fast, fragile growth. A plant living in that kind of environment faces a constant, low-grade threat of being broken apart. Pieces snap off all the time. Animals knock leaves loose as they push past. Brittle branches crack in the wind. Whole segments tumble down a slope after a rockfall or a heavy hoof. For the vast majority of plants on Earth, a detached leaf is simply a dead leaf, a small loss written off. But jade, along with a handful of other tough succulents from similar climates, evolved a strategy that flips that loss completely on its head. Its detached leaves don't die. They root. They grow. They become entirely new, independent plants. So in the wild, every fallen jade leaf is a potential colonist, and a single mother plant slowly seeds the rocky ground around it with clones of itself, one dropped fragment at a time. What looks to us like damage is, to the jade, just another way of reproducing. That is the deep logic behind everything you're doing on your windowsill. You are not performing a trick on the plant. You are triggering a survival reflex it has carried for millions of years. How is that even possible? It comes down to two things working together, and both are worth understanding because they explain every odd thing you'll observe during propagation. The first is that thick, plump, almost rubbery texture of a jade leaf. That fleshiness isn't decoration. Botanists call that water storage tissue hydranchema, and a jade leaf is essentially a small, sealed canteen full of it. Inside that swollen leaf is a substantial reserve of moisture and dissolved nutrients, sealed behind a waxy outer skin that dramatically slows evaporation. That combination, a full tank and a tight lid, is exactly why a detached jade leaf can survive for weeks, with no roots, no soil, and not a single drop of water. It is living entirely off what it carried with it when it left the plant. This is the engineering that buys the leaf its most precious resource, which is time. Growing roots from scratch is slow work, and the leaf has to stay alive long enough to finish the job before it desiccates. The reserve tank is what makes that possible. And here's the detail that reassures so many nervous first-timers. Watch a propagating jade leaf carefully over a few weeks, and you will see it slowly shrivel, soften, and wrinkle, sometimes alarmingly so. People see that and assume they've killed it. The opposite is true. That shriveling is the visible sign that the plan is working. The leaf is spending its stored water and nutrients, drawing down its own canteen to fuel the construction of the brand new plant forming at its base. A shriveling leaf with new roots and a baby rosette is a leaf doing exactly what evolution built it to do. The only time shriveling is bad news is when there's no new growth to show for it, which usually means the leaf was partial, was planted before it calloused, or got cooked in direct sun. The second thing is even more remarkable, and it's the direct answer to why that base of the leaf holds all the power, and why a partial leaf will never root. To understand it, you have to let go of an assumption most of us carry without realizing it: the idea that a leaf is a finished, single-purpose thing. We tend to think of a leaf the way we think of a hand or an ear, a specialized part that can only ever do its one job. For most plants, that's broadly true. A leaf cell is a leaf cell, locked into its role for life, and a fallen leaf has no more future than a fallen feather. But succulent leaves like jades break that rule, and they do it through a property botanists call totipotency. Totipotency is the ability of a single living cell to reset itself, to wipe its own slate clean and become any kind of cell the plant might need, including the cells that build entirely new organs. Jade leaves hold pockets of cells, mostly tucked near that base and along the internal plumbing, that never fully lost this ability. They've been sitting there the whole life of the leaf, quiet, ordinary, waiting for a signal that may never come. Detaching the leaf is that signal. The wound at the cut end triggers a hormonal cascade, and at the center of it is the plant hormone auxin. Auxin floods toward the injury and pools at the wound site, and that accumulation acts like a switch being thrown. It tells the regeneration-competent cells nearby to de-differentiate, to forget what they were, and to reorganize themselves into brand new growth centers called meristems. It happens in a deliberate order. The roots come first, because anchorage and water uptake are the immediate survival priority. So some of those reset cells organize into a root apical meristem and push out that first thread of root. Then a shoot meristem forms, and out of it comes the tiny rosette of new leaves. Step by step, from raw, undifferentiated cells, the leaf assembles a complete and genetically identical copy of its parent. Roots below and shoots above, each in exactly the right place. Sit with that for a moment, because it's worth it. There is no seed involved, no pollination, no genetic shuffling, no parent of the opposite anything. A single detached leaf, running on stored water, rewrites the fate of its own cells and grows a whole new organism that is a perfect clone of the plant it fell from. It is one of the closest things to genuine magic that real biology has to offer. And the staggering part is that it's happening quietly, undramatically, on windowsills and shelves, in homes all over the world. In pots people barely remember to glance at. Here's where it gets interesting for you as the grower. Because the entire process is driven by the leaf's own reserves and its own hormones, your job is almost entirely about not interfering. That sounds easy. It is, in practice, the hardest part. Because every instinct we have as plant lovers is to do something. And with jade propagation, doing something is usually how you ruin it. Let me walk you through the handful of quiet mistakes that sink most leaf propagations. Because if you avoid these, you'll succeed almost every time. The first and most common is overwatering, and it comes straight from a good heart. People see the mother leaf shriveling and wrinkling, and they panic, certain the leaf is dying of thirst, so they soak the soil to save it. But remember what's actually happening. That detached leaf has no roots yet, none, so it physically cannot absorb water from the soil. The shriveling isn't thirst, it's the leaf spending its internal reserves exactly as it's supposed to. All that extra moisture does is sit against the tender, exposed base of the leaf, the one spot where the new plant is trying to form, and rot it. More propagations die of kindness and a heavy hand with the watering can than of neglect. A light misting of the soil surface every few days is plenty. When in doubt, do less. The second mistake is the opposite impulse, putting the cutting in direct sun. The logic seems sound. Jade is a sun-loving desert succulent, so surely it wants to root in blazing light, right? Wrong, and dangerously so. A rootless leaf cannot pull up water to replace what intense, direct sun cooks out of it through the surface. In full sun, a propagating leaf will simply dehydrate and crisp up long before it has any roots to defend itself. What it needs is bright but indirect light, enough to power the slow work of building a new plant without baking it dry. A spot a foot or two back from an east-facing window, or behind a sheer curtain in a brighter window, is just about perfect. The third mistake we've already covered, but it's worth repeating because it's so common and so quietly fatal, and that's using a partial leaf. If you tear the leaf and the base stays on the stem, or you snip and leave a fragment behind, you've removed the very region where all those totipotent, reset-ready cells are concentrated. A partial leaf has the canteen, but not the engine. It can survive a while, even shrivel slowly, but it will never produce roots or a new plant, because the machinery simply isn't there. Always take the whole, intact leaf. And the fourth is using the wrong soil. A dense, moisture-retentive potting mix, the kind sold for general houseplants, holds water against that cut end far too long and invites rot. Jade wants a gritty, fast-draining cactus and succulent mix that dries quickly between mistings, mimicking the sharp drainage of those rocky South African slopes. The right soil quietly prevents half the problems before they start. Patience is the last ingredient, and it's the hardest one. You'll often see the first roots within a week or two, but the new plantlet, that little rosette of baby leaves, can take 4 to 5 weeks to appear, sometimes longer. The temptation to dig the leaf up and check on the roots is real, and I want you to resist it, because every time you disturb it, you set the process back. Jade does not run on your schedule. It runs on its own ancient clock, the same one that's kept it alive on those South African hillsides for ages. Trust it. There's one more thing worth knowing, and it's the most reassuring part of all. Once your new plantlet is established and growing on its own, that original mother leaf has done its job. It will continue to shrivel, and eventually it will dry up completely and detach, or simply decompose back into the soil. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to cut it off, though you can if you want a tidier look. The leaf gave everything it had to create the new plant, and then it bows out. There's something quietly beautiful about that. A whole life given over to making another. This, more than almost anything, is why jade plants have a permanent place on my shelves. and why, across cultures, they get handed down through families like heirlooms. In a lot of American households, especially in the South and the Southwest, where I've heard this again and again, there's a jade plant on a porch or a kitchen windowsill that started as a cutting from a grandparent's plant, which itself started as a cutting from someone before that. People don't always know the botany, but they know the feeling. That plant is a living thread back through the family, and every new pot is a way of carrying it forward. What I love is that the science and the sentiment are saying the same thing. Because every one of those plants is a clone, that windowsill jade really is, genetically, a continuation of the original. It isn't a metaphor for the family plant. It is the family plant, still growing. They are forgiving, they are nearly impossible to kill, and they are quietly, almost absurdly generous. One healthy plant can become a whole collection without costing you a cent. A single leaf, the very kind that snaps off and gets swept into the trash, holds an entire future plant folded up inside it. Once you really understand that, you start seeing your jade differently. You stop throwing away the leaves that drop. You start a little nursery on the windowsill, a row of leaves quietly building roots. And before long, you begin handing baby jades to friends, to coworkers, to your kids, each one a perfect clone of a plant you've cared for and loved for years. Each one a small piece of something living that you get to give away and still keep. So go take a leaf, pop it cleanly off a healthy stem, set it aside to callus for a few days, lay it on some gritty soil, and then practice the hardest skill in all of gardening, which is leaving it alone. In a month or so, you'll have something brand new growing from almost nothing, and you'll understand in your hands what I've been telling you in words. And one last request before you go. If you've propagated jade before, by leaf or by branch, I would love to hear how it went for you and which method you used. So drop a comment and tell me your experience. It genuinely helps other people in the comments learn what works. Take care of your plant.